And there's a huge development coming in at this hour, viewers. As per reports, US intelligence findings suggest that US airstrikes did not destroy Iran's nuclear program. A classified preliminary US intelligence report has now concluded that American strikes on Iran set back Tehran's nuclear program by just a few months, rather than destroying it, which was a claim made by the US president himself. Reuters report says that US media has cited people familiar with the Defense Intelligence Agency findings as saying that the weekend strikes did not fully eliminate Iran's centrifuges or stockpiles of enriched uranium. The strikes sealed off entrances to some facilities without destroying underground buildings. And this is as per the report. This is quite in contrary to what the US president has been saying, that they destroyed the main nuclear facilities in Iran, in Natanz, Fordo and Isfahan. Now, these initial reports, which are also mostly stemming from the US, are suggesting that there's only been a setback by a few months, majorly contradicting what the US president is saying. All right, now there is a lot to unpack here. I'm being joined on the broadcast live from London by Mehdi Sharifi, who's a journalist and a writer. Ms. Sharifi, thank you so much for making time for us and joining me here. What kind of damage has Iran really sustained? Because the scale of the damage was always questionable. There were differing accounts coming in. The IAEA had, soon after those strikes by the US were carried out, the IAEA had claimed that there has been no increase in off-site radiation levels after US strikes. And now these reports are suggesting something in extension of the IAEA statement. First, they suggested no increase in radiation levels, and of course now suggesting that the setback has only been by a few months. Has Iran come out just with a few scratches after this?
Yes, as you mentioned, the report said at best 2-3 months setback. And just throughout this time of following the war, it was very evident that at best Israel and the US were disrupting the supply chains. They haven't completely eliminated Iran's nuclear capabilities or program. Of course, Trump is after a political win here. That's why he was so fast to use the word destroyed and then later retracted to the word degraded. And we're actually on a slippery slope here, because what happened in this 12-day war is that on the Iranian side, it was like a PTSD flashback to the 1980s when Saddam Hussein invaded, which was also seen as a surprise attack. And what this means for Iranian politics is, as we know, there's a conservative base. And after this war, if anything, on the Iranian side, it strengthens the case for why Iran should build a nuclear weapon. So at this moment in time, we still need more assessments and detailed assessments to come out, because this is just preliminary. But for the time being, as I mentioned, at best, a few months of setback on Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Ms. Sharifi, now if I were to just take a little further from where you ended your first response, if it's just a few months of setback, and we heard from the Iranian president that Iran will assert legitimate rights to its nuclear use of uranium, what are Iran's legitimate rights in this respect? And do you feel the enrichment will continue as it was in the past? So after this entire ordeal of 12 days, are we exactly where we were before this?
Yeah, so Iran's claims are that its nuclear capabilities are for peaceful purposes only, and this contradicts the Western claim, was also Israel's claim that no, Iran is building nuclear weapons. However, Iran has, according to the international community, strict regulations when it comes to checking these its uranium supplies. But I'd like to also mention that when it comes to Iran's claims, they also tend to refer back to a fatwa, which is a religious almost sermon that keeps them practically accountable as per se. And that fatwa is that Iran will not build nuclear weapons. It goes against their religious values. But Netanyahu doesn't believe this. He believes Iran is out here to build a nuclear weapon and to attack Israel with it. So at any moment, if these claims resurface back from Netanyahu, we will see clashes and an escalation all over again. And we need to remember Netanyahu has been claiming that Iran is building atomic bombs or building a nuclear bomb to absolutely annihilate Israel for decades now. Again, I can't give you an exact calculation or prediction of how far Iran is into building a nuclear bomb, because there are so many mixed messages when it comes to this topic. Even from Tulsi Gabbard, she went from saying, no, Iran is not close to building a nuclear weapon, to only a few days or a week later taking it back and saying, no, actually, they are. So I wouldn't really trust anything until we get a formal, professional, non-biased assessment by an international spectator, rather than any intelligence agencies that belong to other foreign states that will have their own self-interests.
Ms. Sharifi, I appreciate the caution you're taking in jumping to any kind of conclusion there, but if we were to stick with what we know so far, that is the ceasefire, how fragile do you think it is, as both sides still seem to have their hands on the trigger? They're hinged on each other's resolve to abide by this ceasefire. How long do you think it's going to last?
If I was to say a prediction, I can't say an exact one, because as I mentioned earlier, Netanyahu could at any point resurface his claims. And it's not just about the nuclear topic. We have to look at the wider context. Iran's still in Israel's backyard in Gaza with full support, backing Hamas, which Israel considers a national security threat and considers them a terrorist group. Iran hasn't revoked their support for Hamas, and a lot of Iranians on the government side actually believe that the Gaza conflict was a huge factor in Israel attacking them. So there's a complete mistrust here. And we saw it even as soon as the ceasefire was announced. It took them both ages to admit there was a ceasefire, and they were pointing fingers all over again. And on both sides, Iran and everyone close to the Iranian government have already said the minute Israel attacks Iran again, they will retaliate. And Israel on the other side, there's two cases. So they can either just go for a surprise attack again on pre-claims that Iran is close to building an atomic bomb that they're going to use against Israel. Or if Iran does attack Israel, which they tend not to do directly, as I mentioned earlier, they tend to do it through their proxies. But if in the case they do directly attack Israel, Israel will also retaliate. It's very shaky at the moment, but I think with this ceasefire that I would say was swiftly came about, I don't think a lot of people expected it. A lot of people actually anticipated for this to escalate and reverberate across the region. I mean, we already saw them attack Qatar. But as we saw, is clearly the US has some diplomatic power here, and so do the Gulf allies, because I'd like to mention that Qatar played a pivotal role in terms of the Iranian helping Iran to agree to the ceasefire. I don't think this would have been possible without the Gulf allies.
Ms. Sharifi, when you spoke about the diplomatic talks or diplomatic power at this point, let's take it in that front now. The diplomatic talks, which were ongoing for about a number of weeks, nearly 5 rounds had taken place before the preemptive strikes took place. As of now, there was also a statement which came from the Iranian president saying that they would want to continue on the negotiating table. My question that I had framed at that time was that, does Iran hold any cards now that it comes back to the negotiating table, if that's what it wants to do? But with this latest report coming in suggesting that there's just been a few months of setback to Iran, do you feel Iran will now be willing to come back to the diplomatic talks, having more cards in its hands after 12 days of rising lion, midnight hammer, and Iran's just been set back by a few months? So perhaps it wants to have talks so that everyone comes down to the table, because the damage, as of these initial reports are suggesting, has been minimal to Iran.
Yeah, I mean, they were minimal. However, there were 600 civilians killed. And even though the Iranian public rallied around the president and the nation, some people were still very frustrated and felt like the Iranian government got them into this mess that they were in. But also, I mean, Iran is interested to go back to the nuclear table. According to their state media, Peshkian, the president, has already spoken to Saudi's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, saying that he's ready to reconcile with the US. But we need to remember, before this war even broke out, there wasn't much hopes for the nuclear agreements, because on the US side, they were asking for complete surrender for Iran's nuclear program, which the Iranians do not want to do. However, the fact that they are ready to come back to the table, which I don't know if you remember, only a few days ago, they said they weren't, and they absolutely do not trust the US, and they find the US to be very deceitful. But we do have some hope that they will come back. However, I wouldn't hold my breath completely because if the US still insists on a complete surrender, that is not likely. If anything, as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, this has strengthened Iran's case on why it would need to keep building these nuclear capabilities and just defend itself. But I would also like to mention, which your viewers are very aware of, Iran is under crippling sanctions, and the whole premise or part of the premise of why Iran's current president was elected was revolved around Western engagement and just re-engaging with the international community and just making Iran less of a pariah so they can get back on their feet. People are suffering. I mean, even when they were trying to flee the cities, a lot of people couldn't flee. People are struggling in Iran.
I hear what you're saying, and Ms. Sharifi, Iran has remained a signatory to the NPT non-proliferation treaty, and it has been a signatory to it for decades, while Israel is not. That's a known fact. Do you reckon any changes in Iran's stance on the treaty going forward?
I believe not. I believe Iran wants to retain this public image that they're not interested whatsoever in building nuclear weapons, and that Israel is the hypocrite in the region that refuses to sign this agreement and that has had nuclear weapons, which a lot of analysts say since the 1960s. So I think Iran would want to retain this image regardless of anything.
All right, Ms. Sharifi, thanks so much for joining us, and there will be more to discuss. Would love to have you on the broadcast again.